Well, I think anything that you have to overcome in the private life, because again, trumps everything in the business life. So I think I want to focus on the business life. Although I think the hardest things were not business, because ultimately business is money, and I always say that any problem that you can resolve with money is not a problem.
Welcome to the Break Free podcast. I have created this podcast to start honoring people that are making this world a better place through their great leadership skills and leading companies that provide massive value to the marketplace. Today we have with us Henry. Henry, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Good to meet you.
Henry, for the audience, can you tell me your full name? Where do you live and what do you do for a living?
My name is Henry Charrabe. I live in New York, in Westchester County, just outside of New York City. However, I commute most of my time to Tampa, Florida, where our company is headquartered. A company called Seven Seas Water Group. Our freshwater division is in Tampa, and our wastewater division is in Houston, where I actually am sitting today.
Beautiful. So, Henry, you live in New York City, and you have the opportunity to live in Tampa, and you haven't done the move. Tell me.
Well, there are multiple reasons. I have three kids. They were all in school by the time I started this job in September 2021. And as you probably know, family trumps everything. So we stayed in New York, and I commute.
Beautiful. And also, New York City is a beautiful city. I've been there several times, and I live in Toronto, and it's very close to Toronto. It's just 10 times bigger than Toronto.
It seems like the big brother of Toronto. Yeah, Toronto is great. And Tampa is nice too, but especially these days, it's the middle of August. Not having to live in Tampa is not a bad idea.
Yeah, it's too hot for sure. Henry, it takes a lot of determination to become a top leader of such an organization where you are. But before we start with your personal leadership experience, tell me, what does your current company does? Seven Seas Water Group. Like, what is your main focus?
So Seven Seas Water owns and licensed the name Water as a Service. So we really truly focus on owning, operating, maintaining, and financing water and wastewater treatment plants, where the customer does not have to pay millions of dollars outright, but basically we sell them water as a service. So we have a specification of water that we have to sell. And then in a long-term 15, 20, 30-year agreement, we either treat their wastewater or we deliver fresh water. So we have about 14 desalination and brackish water treatment plants that we own and operate mainly in the Caribbean, Panama, and Peru. And we lease about 165 wastewater treatment plants in the United States, mostly in Texas.
That's incredible. So your clients are governments then, municipalities, or also private corporations?
That's correct. Most of our clients are governments, countries, utilities. However, we have some private clients, and we are now focusing also of increasing and focusing on the industrial water as a service space, where we would have industrial clients that also would benefit not having to use their CapEx, but allow us to invest and run their wastewater treatment challenges, and them obviously focusing on what they're good at, whether it's oil and gas, food and beverage, consumer electronics, semiconductor, whatever it is. That's the third leg of the stool that we're trying to advance.
One of the things that surprises me is that a lot of the people in the world don't have access to clean water, and the world is 70% water. And I keep saying, just because we don't have the technology to leverage that resource, and you guys are doing it with desalination plants. Can you expand a little bit more? How does that operate? Like, how can you get salt water and turn it into drinkable water?
Sure. So I think the first and most important thing, David, if I can say, is the misperception that we're waiting for technology. The water industry, unfortunately, but for good reason, is very conservative. And, you want to make sure that whatever you produce is drinkable and safe and reliable. Having said that, we have all technologies that are necessary to make any body of water anywhere in the world usable. The question, though, is always money. Who's paying for it? How much are we paying for it? And in what concept structure are you paying for it? So what we are focusing on are BOTs, build, own, operate, or build, own, operate, transfer, design, build, own, operate, depending on how you want to use the acronym, where again, we are owned 100% by Morgan Stanley Infrastructure Partners, which is the infrastructure group out of the New York-based Morgan Stanley Bank. And we come up with the capital. And to your question about how do you make it happen, the number one and known technology in desalination is reverse osmosis, which basically is a very fine filter where you push a lot of water with a lot of pressure to very fine filters that take out a lot of the solids, and then you have a pre and a post treatment, and ultimately have some of that wastewater, some of that salt water, which is called brackish water, which is called brine water, dispersed. And the other side of the brine water is the fresh drinkable water, which you can then demineralize and use for drinking. It's a very common technology. There are enormously large plants, specifically in water scarce area, like in the Middle East, Spain. We now have first desalination plants in water scarcity in Europe. They're all over Latin America. And we see more and more now also here in the US and elsewhere. So reverse osmosis is a common known technology wherever you need to desalt water.
So I guess it's got to be also price effective, because if you have several countries using that technology, that means that they can afford it, right?
That's right. The biggest component of the cost in this case is energy, right? And so as you can make these technologies more and more energy effective and maybe co-locate or, make sure that, for example, what we concentrate on decentralized plants, right? Rather than having one very, very large plant where you use all the energy, then push the water through an enormous amount of grid from place A to place B to place C, is to really have them decentralized. So you don't need the energy necessarily to push it through a network, but have it more decentralized at a point of use where the customer might need it. And that makes it more efficient and I think more also digestible from an investment point of view.
That is fascinating, Henry. Wow, thank you for that lesson. I think the audience will really appreciate it, because we just take it for granted, right? We open the tap, or we buy a bottle of water and we have no idea what it takes to get that water into your mouth.
That's right. Well, especially in the US, where we are so blessed to have water. But if you are a resident, David, in New York City, for example, and you ask anybody how much they pay for their water, they won't know. And the reason they don't know is because it is supposedly included in your rent or in your HOA fee or whatever it is that you pay. And if a good is included in your fee and you don't even know what you're paying for it, then you tend to waste it or not appreciate it. If you go to other parts of the United States where people are very aware of their water cost, they also conserve it better. And if you go to places outside the United States where people are starving for water and are literally having the scarcity, they surely know how much it costs them and how difficult it is for them to obtain the water. So we need to price it correctly and make everybody aware what a desperately needed resource that is, and conserve it and handle it accordingly. Beautiful.
All right, Henry. Let's jump into the time machine and look back in time to see how you got to be the CEO of such an amazing organization. Remember your years in high school, your last year. Where were you then, and what was in your mind, and what were your hopes and dreams for the future?
Oh, wow. Well, I had long blonde hair and I was very fit. No, I remember being in high school. I went to high school in Berlin, Germany. And I had just returned after a exchange program in the United States. And I wanted to finish high school and start university in the United States because I really wanted to immigrate to the US. However, at that time, I applied for universities in the United States. The cost was about $25,000, $26,000 a year, much less than it is now. But in Berlin, where I ended up studying, the cost was $250 a year, or a semester. So obviously, I stayed put. But I was my dream and my goal to ultimately leave Berlin and make it to the US.
Now, when you were there, did they still have the wall and the communist Germany and
well, I was. When I finished high school, Germany was already unified. But I remember growing up, and it was obviously a divided city. I remember being on the wall on November 10th, the night after the wall opened, with my friends from high school, and being on the wall and seeing the East and the West, and being part of obviously the historic situation that occurred at the time. But when I finished high school, it was already after Germany was reunified, and you could see East Germany coming along with West Germany, and I grew up in the western part of the city.
Must have been shocking for you to see that transformation, that change of a country reunited, right?
It was shocking. There was a lot of experiences. It was a life history. My father decided to become self-employed, and he was the first person to sell in East Germany with West German currency, where they still had different currencies. And he opened a fruit stand in the center of East Berlin. And it was fascinating. It was truly an amazing experience, and I'm very grateful for having had the chance to be there and to see the human aspect of what it's like to see people seeing pineapples and bananas for the first time and asking how to peel them.
I don't know what's going on with the world, but if you see the trend, people are going more towards Marxism and communism, and it looks like the whole world is going to the left side, extreme left, and they don't even realize what that is like. Look what you just told me. The eyes of the people that they were seeing, fruit for the first time in their life because they were on the communist side, so there was no prosperity, and I just don't get why. Why people? I guess they don't know, right? We forget fast. Maybe the new generation, they have no idea how is it like to live under a communist regime, right?
Yeah, I think we forget, we don't appreciate what we have, and we tend to be, I think, torn to both extremes on one and the other side, and that causes societies to have this incredible tension. And ultimately, the silent majority ought not to be silent, because it's otherwise the extremes that you only hear from, and that causes one side or the other side to think there's only people on the extreme left or on the extreme right, whereas the vast majority I don't think is there, but is unfortunately silent.
Yeah, it's crazy. So what did you go to university for? Did you go to university in Berlin then?
So I started university in Berlin, undergraduate, but I still had that desire to study abroad. So I studied one semester in Tel Aviv, in Israel. And then I studied in Tel Aviv, and I went back to Berlin, finished undergraduate, and at that point had applied for a tuition scholarship in the United States, and finished undergraduate in Berlin, and then started to graduate school outside of Boston.
What did you take on graduate school?
I focused on political science. That was my way to get here through several beneficial coincidences. I started a second degree in international economics and finance. I then started working, and then ultimately went back for a third graduate degree. But I studied in Berlin, and at my first graduate degree, I got a master's in political science.
What a beautiful story. You had this in your mind. You were set. You knew how to get there, even though it looked impossible money-wise. You figured out a way to get there, and now look at you.
I was lucky, and I was, and again, it was a lot of hard work, and along the way, I think I had great mentors and great supporters that only get you there. I think I've had plenty of experiences where you see situations and companies fail because of one individual, but I've never seen any success because of one individual. It always takes more than one and a team.
That's true, Henry. And I'm a true testimony like you that God blesses people that are persistent and that have clear goals, as long as those goals are for your betterment and for the betterment of the people around you. There is countless people in the world that I know that they have this beautiful dream, this goal, but once they have the first big goal, they get afraid and they go back to their status quo, even though where they are is miserable.
Yeah.
And all it takes is, go through the wall or go above the wall and dig a hole and go under it, but be persistent, figure out a way, right?
Yeah, but it obviously comes with sacrifices, right? You can't have it all. I think it's you look at successful people, and I think very rarely would you see a successful person, whether success means monetary wealth or other success, and it comes easily. I've tried to instill in my children, and then generally, you have to work hard. Things don't come easy. There's billions of people in the world. You have great competition, but don't expect that anybody gives you anything. You have to work very hard for it. I think you ultimately, in the long term, win by doing it above board. Do it honestly and faithfully and correctly. But you have to work very hard. And if there's an obstacle that can be overcome, you have to overcome it. But if you stop there and then and there, you will not get there.
Henry, I was talking with a leader yesterday from California, and she was explaining that if you notice the pattern in North America, after a huge period of constant growth and abundance, there comes always a period of lack and a scarcity. And it's because the people that grew up in the abundant period, they had it easy to go up. So they didn't teach their children the business acumen and the life acumen, the discipline required to get where they were. So basically, they were raised by their grandparents and their parents because they are the ones that did the hard work. They rode all the way up to success. And while they were growing up, they had children and they didn't teach their children what it takes to be successful. So I think now in North America, we're seeing this downfall, and it's partly my fault. I had 3 kids. I came to Canada when I was 19 years old, 20 bucks in my pocket, and I was able to build a small empire in the 32 years that I've been in this country. But I never demanded the same thing for my children. I mean, my children are well educated, they are driven, but not as much as I was, because they didn't have to go through the obstacles that I went through. Right?
I think that's exactly what I think makes this country and Canada also, but especially this country great ultimately, is immigration. Because we always have another generation that comes to the United States that has to roll up their sleeves, that cannot rely on the family name and the connections, like, growing up in Europe, whether it's Germany, France, the UK, Italy, where you have family names and you have certain, universities that you go to because of your influence and because of your connections that will set you up for life. In the United States, still, if you don't work hard and you don't do it correctly, you'll be having a hard time succeeding, like you showed in your example. And we both are immigrants. And I think the problem with the immigration generation is that we then tell our next generation, which is natural, why we don't want you to have it this hard. We want to make sure you have what you need.
Exactly.
But then that value is not necessarily there. But I think the person you spoke to is absolutely right. And I think in the US, immigration, or in Canada, anywhere where you have a driven part of the population that just has to, get up at 6 a.m, be a busboy in Queens, New York, and clean tables and do hard work in order to make ends meet and feed their family. This will always, I think, ultimately allow a country like the United States to outperform other countries, because we don't have that comfort level with, if you're part of an aristocracy, a part of a different part of society, that you have it made. So I think that will always drive innovation and progress.
And Henry, I had the privilege of investigating multi-generational family businesses, and the common denominator is that they get their children through the whole fire cycle. They get their children in the companies from janitorial services all the way up when they have to earn the right to become CEOs. They have to earn the right if they want to stay in the family business.
Correct.
And that's why they succeed with multiple generations. Most businesses, though, they don't survive the second generation. They get passed on to the next, and then it dies.
That's right, and that's exactly the challenge. But I think that's a great lesson.
For sure. So, Henry, out of your 3 degrees, what did you like the most? What did you enjoy the most?
Well, I certainly, because it's my passion, I liked my third graduate degree the most, which was in Master's in Public Administration, focusing on international security. I as you pointed out at the beginning, I grew up in a city that was divided between East and West. I think I knew very well what the long-term repercussions are of having a totalitarian government that causes families, not even in different countries or different cities, but on the same street, to be literally divided. And my passion was always that. And I moved to New York on July 2001. And 4 months later, in September 2001, New York City was attacked on 9/11. And so I then and still believe that was something that I was passionate about, is international security and counterterrorism. And that's what I enjoyed the most. Having said that, as you know, life plays a different role. And after I graduated, President Obama was just elected, and there was a lot of people moving into the government, and I had the opportunity to go back into the private sector, and I had my second child on the way, and I asked my wife, and she was very clear that we needed to make money rather than just sit on somebody's couch, and I was able and lucky to, I think, have a very good career in the water space and what I've done after graduate school. But the area that I was most passionate about is definitely international security and the massive public administration.
Beautiful. What what was your first job? You jumped right into the water industry?
No, good question. So after I graduated in 2001 with a master's in political science and a second master's in international economics and finance, I started working for in July 2001 a very wealthy individual. His name is Ronald Lauder, whom you probably know from the cosmetics conglomerate Estee Lauder, and I worked for Mr. Lauder for 20 years in total. I started with a 6-month trial period. I had an offer to work for him or to work for Shell Aviation out of London. And my back then girlfriend, now wife, said, I'd much rather live in New York than in London. So I said, okay, let's give this a shot. So it became a 20-year career. And I worked for him in a personal capacity as part of his business development investment portfolio. So we looked at investments, we looked at water investments, we looked at real estate investments. He was interested in Eastern Europe. He had create a great business with Central European Media Enterprises, where he owned several TV stations in Eastern Europe. So it was a great run.
That's amazing. How did you land at that job? That's like one in a million.
Good. Yeah, it was good question. I again came to this country without any money, so I had to work throughout my time in graduate school. And so at one point I was working for the Center for German European Studies because they helped me with my tuition, and I worked. And through that, I knew the director, and the director of the center knew the president of the university. And Mr. Lauder was involved as a trustee for the university. And he turned to the president of the university and said, "Do you have somebody with XYZ background that I could interview?" And so they ultimately suggested that I interview with Mr. Lauder. It was myself and a couple of other students. And, don't tell him he made a mistake, but he picked me. So that's how I landed the job.
And you were able to grow in that career for 20 years, right?
Yes, it was a great experience. Worked for him directly in investments and then ultimately acquiring technology and building it. Then I left again in 2008 for graduates, 2007 for graduate school. But then when I came back in 2009, he asked me to come back and in 2010 really start this water investment. And it worked until we ultimately became public, which were publicly traded on the Australian Stock Exchange. And I left that business in November 2020 to then just be hired by Morgan Stanley to run the current company, Seven Seas Water.
That is incredible. So you actually run the entire water business through your previous job, through him.
Yes. We worked together. It was his vision, and he believed water was the oil of the 21st century, and obviously the key to peace in the Middle East, and it was great working directly and building a global water and wastewater treatment company, which was first called RWL Water, and we then merged and became Fluence, publicly traded, and he's still the major owner of that publicly traded company.
That is beautiful. Now tell me, for somebody that is 30 years old and wants to be where you are, and they have this entry-level opportunity to this conglomerate that you were, what would you tell them? How do you reach the top? How do you get trusted to run investments that takes millions and millions of dollars of risk and turn it into a publicly traded company? Like what are those basic steps to get to where you got?
Well, first of all, I'm telling them to call David and get your advice and listen to your podcast. But look, I think there's a couple of things that I would say, and I think I mentioned them earlier. I think it takes a lot of hard work and a lot of sacrifice, right? When I had other kids that were in graduate school and were from a much wealthier background and they could go out at night, I could not, because when they did their homework in the afternoons, I was working at the Center for German European Studies. When they were they had cars. I never had a car in my first two degrees, right? I had to take the commuter rail to and forth. So I think it requires sacrifice. It requires very hard work. It requires listening. There will always be, I'm a firm believer that, if you're the smartest in the room, you're in the wrong room. That there are other people you can learn from and that you listen to. I had great mentors along the way. I think it's important to speak your mind and to be honest and true to yourself, because ultimately in business and whatever you do, there will be people who you don't agree with. And I think at the right time to make sure it's not about you, but what's best for the business, and to speak up is important. And to play by the rules. I really do think so. I think what goes around comes around. And ultimately, I think being able to go home at night and look in the mirror and say, hey, you know what? Maybe they agree or disagree, but at least I agree with it. And take that risk. Take that risk to be wrong. Take that risk to be comfortable. And again, listen and understand it will never, ever be only you. I think success is really a child of many parents.
That's true. Success is a team effort. We get recognized when we get to the top. But if you look at my award pictures when we have these beautiful award ceremonies, I always bring my team because it's the team that made me who I am.
Right.
And it's because of them that I have all that I have. And so the team that is working with me, but also the people outside, like you said, it's funny. I've been going through this multiple business networks, like CEO type networks, where you go and you learn from smarter people than you. And one of the advices that you said was great because it's not about being proud or arrogant, but when I felt that my level of knowledge topped that group, I moved to the next group. And then when I got to the next group, I was the lowest level in knowledge. And then the same thing happened. I did that 3-4 times. So now I'm about to open my own group where I get to teach what I've learned to other entrepreneurs so that people can come and grow themselves in this group. But it's the only way, and it's hard. And that's going back again to have that discipline, that lifestyle of discipline and not taking anything for granted. It's required. Just by acknowledging that you're not the smartest person, it requires a level of humility and also a level of understanding that I need to keep growing no matter how hard it is.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of people that one can learn from that are not entrepreneurs, that are not in a business, but they are good people. You follow how they treat others. You look at what they have accomplished in private life, in philanthropy, and whatever else there is. And you learn maybe also from other people's mistakes, right? The best thing is not to have to repeat other people's mistakes. So sometimes it's good to see an example of how not to do certain things. So I think that ultimately molds you and allows you, with a little bit of luck, to ultimately, hopefully, reach your targets.
For sure. And you're right. They don't have to be entrepreneurs. In fact, if you look at my early mentors, my grandfather, he was a chartered accountant. That one of the persons with most integrity that I've known in my whole life. Mm-hmm. He's passed away now for sure, but all the foundations for integrity that I had came from him. And without that, I wouldn't have been able to succeed in life.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Henry, problems, obstacles. What has been the hardest thing that you had to overcome in your life?
Well, I think anything that you have to overcome in the private life, again, trumps everything in the business life. So I think I want to focus on the business life, although I think the hardest things were not business, because ultimately business is money. And I always say that any problem that you can resolve with money is not a problem.
Wow, so that's deep for sure.
I firmly believe that. I've experienced it, and I think so. But if you focus on the business part, I think the hardest thing in a business is human interaction. You have a good quarter, you have a bad quarter, you meet your targets, you don't meet your targets, you win a customer, you don't win a customer. That's day to day. That's part of what we do. But human interaction, motivating teams, making sure that people do their best in their job. And if they don't, I always say the easiest thing to do for managers is to fire somebody. But the most difficult is to improve, is to replace and improve. And so it's easy to just get rid of somebody and say, I'm the boss, I get rid of you. But I think what drives leadership is to take that person and help that person grow and see if there's a way that he or she can become a very valuable member. And sometimes you have to pull the trigger and say it doesn't work. But I think people growth and working with others and making a team gel and ultimately, make 1 + 1 = 4. I think that is the biggest challenge in business to overcome is the human element.
Oh, that's for sure. No, for sure. And I think the amount of success that you have in your life is going to be because of the people around you. So that if you don't invest time and money in growing these people, you will never grow. That's for sure.
Yeah.
What's next for you, Henry? What's next in your life, in your career? you had this job for a couple of years now, and you're leading this company. What are the objectives now?
Well, the objectives are very clear. I think we've been able to create a fantastic team. It took 2 years to turn this company around. There was a previous regime, and when they were taken private and sold, there was some significant loss of talent and executives that had left, and there was not a clear strategy. I think we now have I'm obviously biased, but I think we have a very good strategy. I think we have a very good board of directors, which is a mixture between the ownership structure of Morgan Stanley and water treatment experts. So it's 3 and 3. I think we have a very good leadership team. And now it's really there to execute, right? So I think the next 2-3 years will be to execute and to really, David, make everybody aware, inside and outside the water industry, when they think about water as a service, they think of Seven Seas Water Group, and they think about not having to invest their own capital, but are comfortable with outsourcing the ownership and the operation and maintenance to their water and wastewater treatment systems to us. And then ultimately, as is common knowledge, if you're owned by an infrastructure fund, the infrastructure fund will seek to monetize their investment and sell. So that will be the next step. And what that means for me personally very much depends on whoever is the next investor, right? I live by the golden rule, which is he who has the gold makes the rule. So if there's a new investor, that person or that investment firm or that strategic will decide whether they want to continue to work with Henry and the team. And I look forward to what's coming next, because I'm having a blast, and I'm thinking that we're on a very, very, very good path of having a real successful company with all the 225 people that are working for Seven Seas Water.
That's why I love capitalism. What you just described is a way to actually grow services for the people in a way that is sustainable, where everybody wins. If you look at developing countries, that they still manage their water systems with their own resources. On the public sector, Micah, it's horrible, and all kinds of diseases and scarcity. Water is not fluent, like water goes out 2-3 times a day. And then you look at countries where they start privatizing, so they allow competition to win those contracts. So when people have to do a better job at a more affordable way because there is competition, there is a free market where they have to actually fight for the right to have that service, then everything starts improving, isn't it?
Absolutely. I'm a big believer in our field here in the United States and P3s and public-private partnerships, where you demand the public sector to come in to have that competitive tension, but to also have the public sector there, because obviously water is a very important common good that needs to be relied upon and cannot be priced out of affordability. And to really have a partnership between the public and the private sector. But I think the private sector has to play its role. And again, the water industry, unfortunately, has been very conservative, has been run by, the old boys network, as I call it. And I think there are some new ways to getting it done. And now that water is really in everybody's mind, between Flint, Michigan and Jackson, Mississippi, and especially in this country, but everywhere else, where you just described in developing nations where I've done a lot of business and everywhere else, water mismanagement ultimately is always a management issue. It's always the mismanagement of politicians or utilities that have been asleep at the wheel. And that is ultimately very, very frustrating, because ultimately the people that are at the end of the faucet literally are the ones suffering. But all of that can be prevented by forward thinking, by making clear decisions, and by taking accountability and responsibility for your actions. And I think we can really, really solve that by having private-public coordination.
Wonderful. Henry, thank you so much for being in the show. I don't want to overtake your time. I will ask you one last question before we finish the podcast. If you had access to a billboard in front of the busiest highway on earth, what would you write in it?
That's a tough question. What would I write? Have your own compass and values, stick to them, and don't give up.
Have your own compass and values, stick to them. Wow. If they people would actually even know what that means, this world would be a different place.
Well, we play our part, right? We do whatever we can.
Yeah. Henry, thank you so much for your influence. Thank you so much for helping this world have cleaner water at an affordable cost. if people would like to find more about you and your business or ask more questions, where can they find you online?
Thank you, David. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you. The best place is to go to sevenseaswater.com to find out more about what we do and how we do it, and to get in touch. And we love to, increase the business and grow from here. So whatever we can do, we'd be excited to get into further conversations.
Fantastic. Henry, have a blessed rest of the week, and God bless.
Thank you very much, David. Same to you. Be well.
That's all for today's episode of the Break Free podcast. Head on over to iTunes and subscribe to the show. Starting your own business can be tough, but it doesn't have to be. Visit davidmansilla.com to pick up a copy of the #1 international best-selling book, Breaking Out of Corporate Jail. Expand what you consider to be possible and reach your full potential. And join us on the next episode.